Okay, good morning, everybody. Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. So we're back. Masechet Makkot Daf Tet Amud Aleph is where we are. We are discussing the last thing we spoke about was the question of a ger toshav, and we saw that there was a little bit of a contradiction. The Gemara brought it in two ways. Either was a contradiction between the Mishnah itself, or it was a contradiction between two different psukim, where we saw that the question was, is a ger toshav, again, I'm not going to get into now the specifics of who is considered a ger toshav, but is a ger toshav considered as part of these dinim of the ir miklat, the dinim of going into galut for killing somebody accidentally? Would that apply to a ger toshav? We can ask the question in both directions, whether it applies to a ger toshav who killed, or whether it applies to one who killed a ger toshav. So the Mishnah told us that if a Yisrael kills a ger toshav, that would not be the case. However, and initially the Gemara understood that to mean that just as a Yisrael who kills, so too, if the ger toshav kills somebody else, he would also not go. He would also not go into galut. Just go back to the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah said, "Hakol golin al yedei Yisrael, v'Yisrael golin al yedeihen chutz mi ger toshav." And then we said, Mishnah continued, it said, "V'ger toshav eino gole ela al yedei ger toshav." But a ger toshav only goes into exile if he kills another ger toshav. The Gra changes the gifts over here. He takes out the word eino and ela, so it means the same thing. It just, he would read it ger toshav gole al yedei ger toshav, as opposed to our girsa, which says ger toshav eino gole ela al yedei ger toshav. Means the same thing. So the Gemara over here, which we saw, and we'll just read it again quickly. The Gemara said, Alma ger toshav, so on Daf Tet Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top, he said, Alma ger toshav ovet kochavimu, from the beginning, where it says that ger toshav is not included in the dinim of ir miklat. He's considered like a non-Jew for these dinim, that he's not part of it. However, a maseifa ger toshav gole al yedei ger toshav, you see there from the girs of the Gemara, that is why the Gra had such a girsa. That's how exactly the language he had in the Mishnah. But we see therefore that the ger toshav is included in these dinim. Okay, so we have 3 terutzim. First, the Gemara brings one terutz. It then brings the contradiction again from the psukim, and then it will present us with all 3 terutzim. So terutz number 1, it says over here, Marav Kana lo kasha kan beger toshav shalag ger toshav kan beger toshav shehalag Yisrael. Right, so the difference is, when would a ger toshav is included in the dinim of ir miklat. He would have to go to an ir miklat as well if he killed another ger toshav. But if he had killed Israel, then he could not go, would not go into galut. Rashi over here told us, chutz mi ger toshav, he said, mashma de mitalvayim amaytle, he's excluded from both, i.e. from being the killer or the one who's killed. The law have a gole al yedei aligato, ela nehelag v'lo Yisrael gole alav. That if he would kill, he would not go into galut. Rather, he would be killed. Right? The Ritva in his parish over here adds in another word. The Ritva, when he discusses this, he says ulai neherag. He says maybe he would be killed. So what would be the din of the ger toshav if he killed a Yisrael? I'm not sure. According to Rashi, it seems to be that he would have the bichayv mitzvah. According to the Ritva, he's not sure. Maybe not. But essentially, he would not go into galut. He would not go into the ir miklat. So then says the Gemara, right? There are those who learn this contradiction not between the Mishnah itself, but from the different psukim. We're going to talk soon. The next, not the next Mishnah, but the following Mishnah on the next Amud is going to start talking about where are the Arei Miklat and how they were separated. But it says these 6 cities you'll separate. You'll have for who? It says Livnei Yisrael v'lager v'latoshav. So that implies that the din counts for not just for Yisrael but also for gerim toshavim. However, another pasuk says Uchtiv vayu lachem he'alim lamiklat. These cities will be for you a refuge. Lachem implies lachem v'lo lagelim, for you and not for gerim, you and not a ger toshav. So which one is it? So again, three terutzim. Teretz number one, Amar Rav Kahana lo kasha. Kan beger toshav shehalag Yisrael, kan beger toshav shehalag ger toshav. Right, one case is talking about a ger toshav who killed Israel, where there is no galut, and one is talking about a ger toshav who killed another ger toshav, where there is galut. Uramini. Now we ask the following contradiction, because based on the terutz that you're saying it's a distinction, it depends in terms of who he killed, whether he killed a ger toshav or not. So what about this? We have a braita that teaches us lefichach. Therefore, okay. So what is lefichach? What is therefore talking about? Rashi Aviyah says lefichach sheva mitzvot shenistavu bnei Noach kai. This braita is talking about the sheva mitzvot bnei Noach, whereby the one would be ben Noach who transgressed them would be chayav mitah, would have the be punishable by death. So therefore, over there it says ger ve'oved kochavim shehalgu nehelagin. Whether it was a ger or an oved kochavim, so a ger toshav or a non-Jew, shehargu neheragin. If they killed, they would be killed. Ktani ger dumyad oved kochavim. It's juxtaposed those two categories of people together. Ma oved kochavim lo shna dekatar ba'minei v'lo shna dekatar delav ba'minei. Just like the oved kochavim, doesn't matter who he killed. There would be no difference. The punishment would be the same, whether it was somebody else who was an oved kochavim or not. So too, ma oved kochavim lo shna dekatar ba'minei lo shna dekatar lav ba'minei nelag afger lo shna dekatar ba'minei v'lo shna dekatar lav ba'minei nelag. So too, by a ger toshav, it wouldn't make a difference if the one he killed was of the same category, whether it was also a ger toshav or not. He would also be killed. There you see that even if he's killing another ger toshav, there should not be galut. So that is the challenge on the first teretz. Says the Gemara now, therefore, a second teretz. How can it be that sometimes a ger toshav is included in the mitzvah of galut, of the Yom Miklat, and sometimes not? So Amar Rav Chizda, we're going to see here there's going to be a very interesting machloket, double machloket between Rav Chizda and Rav. Amar Rav Chizda lo kasha, kan sheharago derech yerida, kan sheharago derech aliyah. Okay, so it's going to depend, was he killing him in a downward motion or in an upward motion? Now we've already learned, the first Mishnah of our Perek told us that in terms of going into galut, it's only when it is derech yerida, not when it's derech aliyah. We learned that out from Psukim. We learned out that there is a gzerat hakatuv, why it is that only a derech yerida is considered shogeg, for which one would go into an ir miklat, and derech aliyah, seemingly, where we've learned until now, seemingly derech aliyah would be anus. The Rambam, we quoted the Rambam, who said that when it comes to when if it's derech yerida, right, you're lowering the barrel, or you're walking down the ladder, or whatever it is. So a person has to be careful. A person has to be careful that you're going down, you could slip, something could fall, and we know that it's not unheard of that this accident could happen. It's still shogeg, it wasn't intentional, and therefore there would be a galut for it. But he says if it's derech aliyah, so a person doesn't have to be careful to think that something's going to fall when it's going upwards. And therefore, he says that's more of a freak accident, and that is closer to honest. That's how we've learned until now. And even though it's a gzerat hakatuv, the Rambam brings a tam, a reason to try and understand it. But over here says the Gemara, says Rav Chizda, it depends in terms of the ger toshav. Right, we're not making a distinction in terms of who he killed, but we're making a distinction whether he killed derech yerida or derech aliyah. Right, derech yerida, the Yisrael gali ihunami sagile begalut. If it was derech yerida, so the Israel who would go into galut for doing that, so too the ger toshav would go into galut. However, derech aliyah, the Israel patur hu neherag. However, if it's derech aliyah, where we say Yisrael would be patur, Yisrael would be exempt from going into galut, so too there would be therefore there is no galut. The ger toshav would not go into galut. However, he would be killed. Okay. Seems very, very strange. Rava immediately challenges this. He says, "V'lav kal v'chomer." Can you not say this is a kal v'chomer? He says, "Ma derech yerida d'Yisrael gali iunami sagile begalut." You're going to say just as if it's derech yerida For Israel who would go into Galut, for him as well, it would be enough Galut. Derech Aliyah Israel Patur. You nerag, right? But Derech Aliyah, where the Israel would be exempt, so you would think, okay, there the Ger Toshav would at the very least be exempt. If you're going to say that the din is strong, if you're going to say the din is stronger, maybe for a Ger Toshav than it is for Israel, so then say also there he should go into Galut. Don't say that he's going to be killed or it would be exempt. It doesn't make sense. And we can also, before we understand Rava, what was Rav Chisda thinking here? What is he suggesting? How does it make sense? Derech Yerida, we say for Yisrael, he gets Galut. So too the Ger Toshav gets Galut. Derech Aliyah, when Israel is exempt, the Ger Toshav is going to be killed. It seems a little bit out of proportion. So we have the difficulty, and again, Rava's difficulty here with Rav Chisda is based on the understanding that Derech Yerida is more severe. One would be more culpable for Derech Yerida as opposed to Derech Aliyah, where they would be exempt. However, it must be, and that's why Rava asked the Kal V'chomer. But for Rav Chisda, who doesn't have that Kal V'chomer, Rav Chisda must understand differently. Rav Chisda has to understand that actually Derech Aliyah is not less culpable than Derech Yerida, but perhaps Derech Aliyah is actually more culpable than Derech Yerida. Okay, everybody agrees. We saw this was explicit Mishnah. Everybody agrees that Derech Aliyah for Israel, if it's in an upward motion, there would be no galut. But as we've spoken a number of times, when an accidental murder takes place, it could fit into one of three categories, right? There's shogeg, which is where the person's going to go into galut. There could be ones, which is less than shogeg, where it's completely, the person is not responsible at all. Or there could be what we call karov lamezid. Karov lamezid is whereby it's not quite shogeg, but a person is more responsible than just accidentally. And there would be no galut, not because galut would not be sufficient. And in fact, in a case of karov lamezid, this is where the person's worst off, because somebody who killed somebody in a way that was shogeg but was karov lamezid, the Rambam writes this explicitly, the goel adam has permission to go and kill that person. The rest of his life, he has to be on the run. Even if he goes into an this is a person who is not chayav galut, because galut would not be sufficient. Even if he goes into the Ir Miklat, this person, the goel adam, could come along and kill him. Okay, that's not the case of somebody who is meant to go to the Ir Miklat. When he's there, he's safe. But that is karov lamezid. So have a look here. Tosfot. It's the last Tosfot on the narrow lines. Just before the page gets a bit longer, it says, Amale Rava lo kol shekenu v'ma derech yerida. He says, V'im tomar adraba hi anotenet derech yerida nitan Yisrael kapara desagile begalut. Aval derech aliyah lo nitan Yisrael kaper chamor hu ve'eino goled lo sagi begalut. Okay, he says, you say like this, that derech yerida for Israel, he can get kapara. It's enough for him to go into galut, right? Derech yerida nitan Yisrael kapara, the sagile begalut. Aval derech aliyah, but when it's going upwards, lo nitan Yisrael kapara. There's no kapara there. Chamuru, you could say that it's more chamur. Ve'eino gole, and there's no galut. The lo sagile begalut. There wouldn't be enough for him to go into galut. We saw at the very, very beginning of the Masechet the concept that if somebody had killed in such a way that galut would not be enough for him. So he says, "Yesh lomar delate lehaitama." We're going to see. We haven't actually read in the Rava, who is arguing with Rav Chisda, who says the Kal V'chomer, he doesn't have that reason. He says the derech aliyah lav mishum de lo sagile begalut. Says if somebody killed by in an upward motion derech aliyah, it's not that their galut would not be enough. Ela mishum de kilu bayoter milida, as we've understood until now, that going upwards that is less responsible than going downwards. That is completely against his. That's completely not his fault. That's completely unexpected. You can't say that it's more chamor. Okay, so this is the first machloket between Rav Chisda and Rava. Rav Chisda seems to understand that derech aliyah is in fact more severe more severe than derech yerida. And therefore, derech aliyah would not go into galut, but he would be killed. And if it's derech yerida, he would go into galut. Rava argues with Rav Chisda. Rava says no. If it's derech yerida, then that is galut. If it's derech aliyah, we found that derech aliyah is not responsible. Derech aliyah is patur, so it can't be. The machlokes number one between them: derech aliyah, is it more severe or is it less severe than derech yerida? As a result of that, the question is whether a ger toshav who killed derech aliyah would be killed or would go into or would there wouldn't be galut. Would it be killed or not? And says Rava, says Rav Chisda, that is the difference between the two cases of the ger toshav. So Rava, who argued with that and said, no, we don't make that distinction. It doesn't make sense. Rava, read again. Amale Rava, v'lav kava chomeru is not a kava chomer. Ma derech yeridat Yisrael gali iunami sagile begalot. Right, just as derech yerida. It's enough. It's enough for him to go into galut, right? Derech aliyah Yisrael patur yunerag. You're going to say derech aliyah where Yisrael is going to be exempt, that there is going to be killed. That seems to be the opposite. Ela Rava says no. What is the? So this is teretz number 3. What is the distinction between where we say sometimes we'd have galut the ger toshav and sometimes not? Amarava be'omer mutar. Okay, in the case of omer mutar, somebody who thought that it was permitted. He thought it was permitted. He didn't know that he wasn't allowed to. He didn't know that he wasn't allowed to kill. So Amar le Abaye, Rava says that we'll see it in his answer. He'll say it explicitly in a moment. Amar le Abaye, Abaye says to Rava, Omer mutar anosu. Abaye says that Omer mutar is going to be anos. It's a person thought, what do you want from him? He thought it was permitted, and therefore he did it. How can he be responsible? So Marle says Rava, she'ani omer mutar karov lemezid. Rava says no, I don't hold that omer mutar fits into this category of anos. I hold that omer mutar, somebody who thinks that it's permitted, fits into the category of karov lemezid. Right? We can't say that it's mezid, because mezid by definition means mezid somebody who knows what he's doing. He knows that it's forbidden. Here he doesn't know. That's omer mutar. However, he says it's karov lemezid. It's close to mezid. Why? Because he should have known better. Says Tosfot over here. The omer mutar karov lemezidu. The short Tosfot. It's just one line. He says pelush mishum da yalo le'mod v'achanamya yalo la'yen. He should have learned and he should have understood better. How can you say that he thought the murder was something that's okay? That doesn't make sense. There's certain things which a person is required to know, and it doesn't make sense if they don't know it. By the way, on this topic, there's a very interesting hakdama or haskama which the Netziv writes, and this is connected to Sefer Bereshit. The Netziv writes this we gave a haskama to the Sefer Avat Chesed. The Chafetz Chaim wrote a number of books. The most famous amongst them is the book Chafetz Chaim, and that's why he's referred to as such, which is all about Hilchot Lashon Hara. He also wrote the Mishnah Brura. He also wrote a sefer called Avat Chesed, all about the mitzvah of Gemilut Chasadim. So today somebody writes a sefer, you go to the Rabbanim to get haskama printed in the introduction to your sefer. Where did the Chafetz Chaim go to get a haskama for his Sfarim? So he went to the Netziv, and the Netziv writes a haskama to Avat Chesed, and in there he writes that the whole concept of Gemilut Chasadim, of acting, with friendship and companionship and kindness, one person to another, he says this is something which is built in. It's something which is built into humankind, that it's expected. And even though we don't count actually Gemilut Chasadim as one of the Shivat Mitzvot Bnei Noach, he says nonetheless it is counted, and there is a responsibility. And he bases it on the Psukim in terms of the creation of man. Very interesting to see. But essentially, he says there are certain ideas, certain principles a person should know. This is connected to this idea of Omer Mutar. So over here, says Rava that no, if it was the case of Shogeg, then the Ger Toshav would go into Galut. But if it was the case of Omer Mutar, there he would be killed, because there he should have been there he should have known better. That is closer to karov lemezid, and not honest. So the two-way machloket, what comes out of this, two-way machloket we have between Rav Chisda and Rava. We also have a machloket in terms of how to resolve the contradiction regarding the ger toshav. But fundamentally, machloket number one, is derech aliyah considered more severe than derech yerida or not? According to Rav Chisda, yes. According to Rava, no. And machloket number two, which is the corollary of this, is omer mutar. If a person is omer mutar, they think something is permitted, but it's not. Are they considered, according to Rava, that is karov lemezid? According to Abaye and Rav Chisda, that is going to be more closer to anus, right? And the person is not going to be responsible for that. And the rest of the sugya now, until the Mishnah, is going to go a little bit more in depth into this concept of omer mutar. Which way do we consider it? Do we consider it mezid, or do we consider it anus? And it's going to bring proofs from some of the psukim in Sefer Bereshit with the story of Avimelech. Just before we do that, sorry, yeah.
Question. We learned right at the beginning. First of all, we're dealing with cases here which are all accidental. They're not premeditated. Right. So if somebody's going up a ladder or down the ladder, we've learned what the difference is. Or if he's chopping with an axe, if it's a downward movement or an upward movement, fine. So it's all accidental. It's not premeditated. So you don't think to yourself as you're wielding an axe or climbing up a ladder, what am I doing now? Is this permitted or is it not permitted? Which it seems to, the whole idea seems to be in conflict with what we're learning. And the other point, which you already mentioned, is the Torah so often says, be careful of the ger toshav, etc., etc., etc. And here it looks like we're being more stringent with the ger toshav than otherwise. Is that not a contradiction as well?
Okay, great questions. So firstly, in terms of the Rishon v'Achron Acharon, so in terms of your first question, I think you're right, meaning we're not dealing with anything premeditated, we're dealing with accidental, but the point is that there are different levels of accident, right? There is something which is a completely unexpected, and there is something, the very concept of shogeg, so we discussed before, is not premeditated, but a person has responsibility. A person brings a korban to the Beit HaMikdash. You bring a korban when you've violated something by shogeg. You can ask the question, why, you weren't. So sometimes there's a certain level of, it maybe came out of a certain element of carelessness. Person could have been more careful. And the question is, different acts, different scenarios, what is the level of caution, I suppose? What is the, to which a person has to think, okay, I'm not doing anything intentionally, but nonetheless, the action which I'm doing now, is it possible that an accident may happen? Do I have to take extra precautions? How far do I have to go in terms of that? Again, what we're dealing with here, the question of whether somebody is going to be killed or not. So we know that for Yisrael, the dinim are, in terms of mitat beitin, it's only after hatra'ah, it's only after warning, has to be amazing, has to be premeditated, etc. What the Gemara is discussing now is the case of a ger toshav. And you're right in terms of the way that we treat people, in terms of our behavior, in terms of gemilut chesed and opportunities and things like that. Of course, then one has to talk about haftat hager, etc. And this is not to contradict that. What we're dealing with now is in terms of the legal system, and this essentially is discussed in much greater depth in Masechet Sanhedrin. But in terms of there's a different legal system in terms of the Tariag mitzvot versus the Shivat mitzvat b'nai Noach, and the way that Beit Din would go and would necessarily be Beit Din, but in terms of the punishments that for which one would be liable, which is executed. So but Dinei Yisrael, we have the dinim of hatra'ah and of witnesses, etc. When it comes to Shivat mitzvot b'nai Noach, it is a different system. And that's what Rashi was alluding to when he said in Lefichach, right? That Rashi about halfway down the Amud, he said, "Shivat mitzvot b'nei Noach, Shiva mitzvot shenitztavu b'nei Noach kai, v'kai malan azharatan zohi mitatan." This is what we discussed last week. Somebody asked, "What does that mean? Azharatan zohi mitatan." So azhara means the fact that something is written in the Torah. We know that it is a prohibition. That is the azhara. That is different from hatra'ah, which is where you have witnesses warning in practice somebody about what they're about to do. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin teaches that as haratan zoi mitatan, regarding Shivat Mitzvot B'nai Noach, it works differently. We don't have hatra'ah, but as hara, that is enough in terms of the chiyuv mita, and that would apply to a ger toshav or to an oved kochavim. Again, much more to discuss and much more detail, but that is discussed in Masechet Sanhedrin. But that is essentially a different legal framework which we're working with. But in terms of bein adam l'chavero and in terms of interpersonal behavior, ein achinami, that is something which would have to be which would have to be kept the same. So it's impossible to have a discussion here about the sugya of Omer Mutar without mentioning the Binyan Tzion. So I'm going to mention the Binyan Tzion. Binyan Tzion is Rav Yaakov Ettlinger, who was a Rav in Germany in the 19th century. He wrote a number of commentaries on the Gemara, one which we've quoted a number of times in Masechet Makkot, what's called the Aruch L'Ner. But he also wrote Tshuvot, and his Tshuvot are called Binyan Tzion. And he has a very famous Tshuvah regarding the status of a Mechalel Shabbat B'Faresya B'Yamein. Right? Somebody, we know in the Gemara, the din is that somebody who is a Mechalel Shabbat B'Faresya, somebody who willingly goes and doesn't keep Shabbat publicly, has the din that they are similar to one who would, just like one who worships Avodah Zarah, is considered a Mumar L'Kol HaTorah Kula, considered that they have rejected the entire Torah, and this has many implications in terms of their status for different mitzvot and different activities. So too, that is the din of the Gemara regarding a Mechalel Shabbat. We go back a few centuries, and all of a sudden we have a unique situation in Am Yisrael, which we've never had before, whereby there are many, throughout the generation, there was one individual or a handful of people. Somebody came along and said that they were not keeping Shabbat, so that was a sign of rebelliousness, and that was a sign that they were rejecting it and rejecting Torah, and therefore they were viewed as a mumar l'kol HaTorah kula. Right? In our days, we know that is not necessarily the case. That is usually not the case. There are many people who are not keeping Shabbat, who are not observing these mitzvot, because they've never known anything else, or because going back a couple of centuries, they were swept away by the winds of the emancipation, the Enlightenment, whatever it was. But the question is, what halachic status do we give? Is it the same as? It can't be the same as what's always been, because it's a different societal reality. So the Binyan Tzion, he writes this, and he invokes this principle of Omer Mutar, possibly. Let me actually share the screen with you, and you can see what he has to say for himself. Here we go. You should be able to see my screen now. Yeah, can everyone see? Wonderful. So he says over here, I'll just highlight it. Yeah, he says, Vinay ad kod varenu meikar din, ech ladun machalel Shabbat b'farhesia. Aval leposhei Yisrael shebizmanenu, lo yadana ma adun bahem. Okay, and beginning with this tshuva, and over the next 100 years, this is the next 150 years or so, this is the common theme, right? Lo yadana ma adun bahem. We don't know what to say. We don't know what halachic category this fits in. This is something new. Right? These are people for whom Chilul Shabbat has become something which seems permitted. It's not that they're doing it again. They haven't had a theological decision to reject the notion of Shabbat, to reject the notion of Hashem. It's just maybe they don't know. He says, so would we say right? What we said, Mechalel Shabbat, the Faresya, that's where he does it b'mezid, where he has the din of somebody who's rejected Torah. However, somebody who is doing it not for that reason, this is Omer Mutar. They think it's fine what they're doing for whatever reason. He says that is only karov l'mezid. And he says more than that. You have, and we know, we're familiar with this to this day. Yesh b'hem shemitpalelim tefilot Shabbat u'makachim kiddush. Right. In the past, somebody was a Machanel Shabbat v'Faresya. They were a real Pikoros. They didn't keep Shabbat. They didn't keep anything. Now, but you have people. They may not be Machanel. They may not be Shomer Shabbat, but they come to shul. They mitpalelim tefilot Shabbat. Mekachim kiddush. They make kiddush. V'achar kach mechalelim Shabbat b'menachot Oraita v'drabanan v'arei Machanel Shabbat. Right. And afterwards they go and they will be Machanel Shabbat b'menachot Oraita, drabanan, etc. Arei Machanel Shabbat nechshav k'momar bilvad, mipnei shakofer b'Shabbat kofer b'Briya or b'Boreh. Right? Somebody who is a Mechalel Shabbat is considered a Mumar. Why? Because they deny Shabbat. They deny what Shabbat represents, that Hashem created the world. They deny the existence of the Creator. But this one, he's not denying it because he's saying it in Tefillah. He's making Kiddush. So what's going on here? Right? It's even with their children and their descendants. It's not that they're choosing not to keep Shabbat. It's that they've never seen it. They've never heard anything else. They don't know. So he's the first one to raise this possibility that maybe the halachic category over here is Omer Mutar. Omer Mutar, somebody that thinks that it is forbidden. There are other suggestions later on. He mentions as well the idea, and the one who made this famous was the Chazon Ish, who says that maybe we could apply the principle, what's called the Tinok Shenishba, right, which is a case where the Gemara talks about where a Jewish child is raised in a non-Jewish by a non-Jewish family and doesn't know that he's Jewish. And in the same way, people who don't know the halachot, don't know Torah, or it's never been presented to them in a way that would that they would be able to keep it. So that is a fascinating halachic debate, which is ongoing to this day in terms of how we find the status of a Mechalel Shabbat nowadays. But it's interesting that Binyan Sion invokes this idea, what we're discussing over here, of this Omer Mutar, of somebody who thinks that something is permitted, and therefore that is certainly, we see the machloket between Rav Chisda and Abaye on the one hand, and Rava on the other hand, whether Omer Mutar is considered anus or is considered karov lemeizid, but certainly it is considered less than intention. Okay.
So Rabbi Kenigsberg,
yes,
it's not considered like a tinok shenishba.
Yeah, I mentioned that. So that is.
So I'm saying we mention it as one of the statuses. Somebody's just pure ignorance.
Yes.
Well, that's all.
He does. He mentions, as I said, he mentions that. I mentioned
the Gemara doesn't mention it like that. The Gemara doesn't consider it like somebody who's totally ignorant.
The Gemara doesn't.
He should have learned.
So let me just separate. So we're dealing with two different things. The case we've just been discussing, what the Binyan Sion, he's not discussing about this Gemara. He's discussing a contemporary halachic reality, whereby you have large populations, right? You have entire communities of people who are Mechalel Shabbat, where historically, when the Gemara talks about a Mechalel Shabbat, or over here, we're dealing with an individual case. We're talking about one person. So yeah. What our Gemara is dealing with is the individual case. This question of somebody who didn't know, we say it is we say it is Omer Mutar, and that was the machloket, whether Omer Mutar, do we say that they should have known better, they could have known better. Tinok Shenishba is a different category. Tinok Shenishba is somebody who doesn't know anything at all, and they couldn't have known because of the way that they were raised and because of the environment they were in. They had no opportunity to learn. Yeah. A person has an opportunity to learn, and something so basic, this is the discussion in the Gemara, something so basic as murder, that they didn't know that was forbidden, that according to Rava is problematic. So Rava says we're dealing with Omer Mutar, right? Abaye says that is Omer Mutar is anos. Amar Le says Rava says back Shani Omer Mutar karov lemeizid. So I say Omer Mutar is like closer to meizid. Says the Gemara, each of them goes according to their reasoning. Deitma, we have a machlok Amoraim. Kasavor behema v'nimtza adam knani v'nimtza ger toshav. Rava omer chayav, omer mutar karov lemeizidu. Rav Chisda omer patur. Okay, so this is precisely the case of, similar to the case of Omer Mutar, because Omer Mutar means that you should have known something, you should have investigated something, you thought it was one way, but it was actually different. So here is the case, not where a person didn't know was permitted, but they thought the reality was different. They thought that they were killing an animal, and it was actually a person. They thought it was a Knaani, and it was actually a Ger Toshav. It doesn't mean he's allowed to go and kill the Knaani, but the punishment would be different in the two cases. So Rava Omer Chayav, Rava says be chayav in both cases because Omer Mutar is karov lemeizid, and Rav Chisda says no, it would be patur, he would be exempt because Omer Mutar is anus. Okay, so now we go into the discussion we've seen that Rava and Rav Chisda are arguing about what the status of Omer Mutar is. What is this based on? What is their source? So Eitve Rava le Rav Chisda. So Rava now challenges Rav Chisda. Again, Rava is the one who says that Omer Mutar is Karov leMezid. He says, I will now prove to you that it's Karov leMezid from the story of Avimelech. If the pasuk says, "Incha met al ha'isha asher lakachta." Okay, Avimelech has a dream. There are many dreams in Sefer Bereshit. Avimelech is the one that we often forget, but he has a dream after he takes Sarah into his household. Right, Abraham tells him that Sarah is his sister, so that he won't be killed. And so he thinks that she's not married, and then he has this dream, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, "Stay away from her." And he says, "You are actually chayav meta for the woman who you've taken. She's married, and this is adultery, and this is going to be were you to commit this act, you would be chayav mita." So says the Gemara, "My love b'dei adam." When it says you're going to die, you're going to be chayav mita, surely that means that it's mita b'dei adam, and therefore, right, Avimelech is the case of Omer Mutar, because he thought that Sarah was not married, so therefore he thought this was Omer Mutar, but we see that he is chayav mita b'dei adam, so it's karov leMezid. So says the Gemara, that is Rava's challenge. So Rav Chisda answers back. He says no. He says lo b'dei shamayim. When it says in Chamet, does not mean b'dei adam. It means b'dei shamayim. You can ask the question, right? How is that a proof of anything? Because Rav Chisda is saying that Omer Mutar is not Karov leMezid, but Omer Mutar is Anus. Okay, and if Omer Mutar is Anus, how come over here he's still Chayav Mita b'dei Shamayim? That doesn't seem to make sense. So Vashim, I forget who says it. It may have been the Aruch LaNer, who says that in this case is different because Kadosh Baruch Hu knew that his intentions were not so pure, and there was still some culpability, but nonetheless, there is no. We see that Omer Mutar generally is not going to be considered Karov leMezid. There's no Chayav Mita, at least not b'dei Adam. And he proves it further. He says, Daikanami, we can learn it from the Psukim, which say, Tichtiv mechato li. Right, the Pasuk says, the full pasuk. This is again continuing on. It says, "Vayomer elav ha'elokim b'chalom, gam anochi yadati ki b'tom levavcha asita zot, v'achsoch gam anochi otcha." I've saved you from committing this act, from mechato li, from sinning to me. So that is the fact that Hashem says that. You see that this is we're talking about culpability in the realm of b'dei shamayim and not b'dei adam. So this is Rav Chisda. So Rav answers back, says, wait a minute, is that a proof? Is that a proof? The fact that it says mechato li, that it's a sin to heaven, but it's not going to be culpable in Beit Din. He says, Latamech v'chatati le'elokim. This is from the pasuk talking about Yosef, and the ordeal he had with Eshet Potiphar, that he said, had I done this, I would have chatati le'elokim. Do you mean to say le'elokim v'lo la'adam? That it's only a sin? Right there again would have been a case of adultery, and that would have been Rashi says le'elokim v'lo la'adam v'lo yodea she eshet ish. Right? Would you say that there where it says chatati le'elokim, it's only towards Hashem and not towards man? So there's no ela dino masur le'adam hachanami dino masur le'adam. So just as over there, it's a sin between Ben Adam and Makom, but nonetheless the punishment is the execution of the punishment is given over to Adam, it's given over to Beit Din. So to Chanami dino masur le'adam. So he argues that diuk of mechatoli is not necessarily proof, but nonetheless, so could it be? That's the argument between Rav and Rav Chisda over here, whether when it says in Achmet, you could read it as b'dei Adam, or you could read it b'dei Shamayim. It's not a proof one way or the other. Now the Gemara continues with another proof in the other direction. Itva Abai Rava. But I think we're going to have to keep that for the next year because we are out of time. So have a good day, everybody. Yashar koach, and we'll
to you.
convene the next in 2 days' time.
Yes, correct.